Jai Hind everyone, it's Dr. Monika Agarwal from AKGEC Ghaziabad from the Department of Applied Sciences and Humanities. My subject is Soft Skill 1, Code KNC 101. The topic of today's lecture is Approaches to Communication. The topics covered in this lecture are the five specific approaches, namely reciprocity, objectivity, rationality, utility and universality. So, we will be trying to understand the meaning of these terms and understand how these terms apply to communication. First of all, we must understand what is the meaning of the word approach. If we look into the dictionary, we find that the word approach has various dictionary meanings. It is defined there as an access or the way to reach somewhere. It is also used to indicate the manner to do something. It is there to use for some mental attitude or some awareness towards something, anything, and the prerequisite to see and analyze anything. So, we can take all these meaning together because all these meaning indicate to more or less the same idea, that this is the way to look at something, to reach somewhere or to understand something. So, this word approach applies to communication, means how to look at communication and how to do communication. So, the term first used in terms of the approaches to communication is reciprocity. The meaning of the word reciprocity is determined by its origin, since the term is derived from a Latin word reciprocus, and that means alternating. So, reciprocus is again understood as a word which is formed out of two prefixes. One is re means back, re means again or back, and pro means forward, means towards something. So, these meanings also imply a back and forth movement. Reciprocus means something which is alternating or something which is moving back and forth. Okay. So, when we take it as a state, reciprocity as a state, so that is a state of relationship where there is mutual action, okay, mutual influence and giving and taking relationship, or a kind of correspondence etc. between two parties, two entities. Two entities are interacting with each other, they have their mutual understanding, mutual action, mutual influence, giving and taking. That is the meaning of the word reciprocity. So, if we look at the world and if we look at the life from this approach, we find that almost everything in life has a reciprocal nature. Everything, and it is a law of science also, as stated, that every action has an equal and opposite reaction. This applies to everything, nearly everything in life, but we have to understand it in terms of communication. How does it apply to communication? What is its role? Since we already have understood that communication is a two-way process, it is a reciprocal process, two-way process, giving and taking. The sender sends the message after encoding, and the receiver, when one receives the message, he decodes it, and now it is his turn to respond. So, this response goes back to the sender as a feedback to help him reframe the message if needed, or to go further, continue communicating further information in that chain of sequence. So, that reciprocal process, that reciprocal nature of communication process controls the whole process, because that process is controlled by the result and effect of the process, and that response is the result of the process. One single process, the response comes back to the sender, and the sender analyzes it whether his attempt at communication is sufficiently successful, has evoked a desired response or not. So, as I have underlined it, that by a difference between the desired result and the actual result, the difference between the desired result which the sender initially aimed at and the actual result which he actually receives in the form of response is the difference which indicates the effectiveness of the attempt. So, that is the reciprocal process, reciprocal feature of the process of communication which determines the success of communication, and that also controls the process of communication. Okay. And this term is related to other terms also, like feedback and like being interactive, as we have used earlier. This reciprocity also depends upon the promptness. The promptness, the quickness in our response is very vital in communication, because this shows that we really care for the person who is communicating with us, or we really care for the information which we are receiving. So, promptness in our responses is very important in communication, because that ensures a feeling of being together, feeling of being working together, and that also shows that we really respect and care for the person or for the information which we are receiving. So, reciprocating with others in the communicating effort should be sincere. We should not be careless. We should be consistent. We should be very quick and timely, and we should be sincere. So, our response should appear to be a genuine response. That should appear to be a consistent, timely and sincere response. That ensures the reciprocity of the process of communication. So, these reciprocal gestures, whether we are responding through some words or we are responding through some body language, verbal, non-verbal means, these gestures should be made out of genuine goodwill, out of sincerity. Okay. So, that ensures the effectiveness of communication, and that ensures the effectiveness of the cooperation, that results in cooperation and understanding. The understanding between the sender and the receiver is must to continue with the communication process for an overall cooperative and happy atmosphere, where people are working together towards advancement. So, reciprocity is important in communication, and it is determined by the way we respond to the received information. Next approach to communication is objectivity. Objectivity means something which pertains to some object. Some object, something, means we are focusing on the content of the message, what the reality is. So, objectivity is a state of being objective, means focused on the thing itself. It is a state of being justified, unbiased and uninfluenced by the likes and dislikes of the sender and the receiver, or emotions at the moment of communicating. So, objectivity indicates towards a state of being impartial, the state of being just, unbiased, without any influence by our emotions, our likes and dislikes, or personal prejudices, personal gains and losses. That is the state of objectivity, and that is a must in effective communication. Because in communication, the expressing or dealing with facts or condition as perceived without any distortion is must. The thing should be communicated as it is, without any change, without any manipulation, without any filtration, unnecessary filtration, and it should not be affected by personal feelings and biases, the other you can say negative feelings. Okay. Also the subjective interpretation of the writer or the speaker. The opposite of objectivity is subjectivity. Subjectivity should be controlled while communicating with the other person. We should focus on being objective, means we should focus on the fact, we should focus on the thing itself, not biased by our own personal feeling. That is meant by objectivity. Now, this objectivity has a very crucial role in communication, because while communicating, if the communicators are partial, if the communicators are governed by their own likes and dislikes, by their own vested interest, then their communication will not be effective in a sense to generate a common understanding. So, the communicators have to be impersonal, they have to be objective in order to convey the information effectively, because it is necessary to create a common agreement, because only through the approach of objectivity it is possible for the communicator to frame a common concept for the formation of a consensus where every person agrees to one and a single idea, the same idea. Okay. So, that is called common agreement. So, being objective is very necessary to form a common agreement, since we have to work together, since we have to think together. So, it is necessary to maintain a common consensus or some common agreement towards something. Okay. If we look at something from different point of view, from a subjective point of view, then it will be difficult to work together, then it will be difficult to develop a common understanding. This is very true in our daily life also. Okay. It is very necessary to see things in a single or the common perspective. If the perspective differs, then there is a difference of opinion, and if there is a difference of opinion, that may turn into non-cooperation. So, to get the cooperation of the other person, we should have an approach of objectivity, so that every person looks at the thing in the similar manner and every person has a common agreement towards something. Okay. We see that in many of our communicative practices, in many of our attempts in communication, we not merely attempt to talk about the same thing, okay, but attempt to reach at a intersubjective agreement. Intersubjective agreement means the common agreement, means subjective means pertaining to the person and objective means pertaining to the fact or the thing. Okay. So, we have to create a common understanding, a common opinion which is shared across all the participants of the act of communication. So, we want to create a common opinion, so we should be objective. If we ignore this approach, then it will be difficult to reach at some common agreement. Next is rationality. Rationality, as the word suggests, it is originated from a Latin word rationalitas, which means to be reasonable, to be logical. Okay. So, rationality means the state or the quality of being rational. Rational means logical. Our thinking, our words, our opinion, everything should be governed by the facts, the reality. So, if we are objective, then only we are able to frame a rational opinion, then only we are able to give some reasonable arguments. So, the state or quality of being rational means to be governed with reasoning and logic. Okay. There should be some reason behind, some logical connection between things which we are communicating. So, in communication, only with a reasonable view at every step in the process of communication we will be successful. Means whatever we are saying, that should be connected with all the things in context, and that should be connected with the previous thing, and that should have a coherent connection with the coming things. So, we should not be irrational, we should not be illogical while communicating, while sharing some information with the other person. So, it is the duty of the communicator to be rational at the time of encoding, decoding of the message which they send or receive. So, the role of rationality in communication is very important, because whatever information we are sharing, the parts of that information cannot contradict each other. Okay. So, information cannot contradict itself. So, all the parts of the information, all the parts of the message should have a logical sequencing and interrelatedness. So, rationality must be there while encoding a message, so that it is understood in the light which we want to be understood by the receiver. Okay. If it is rational, if it is logical, if it is factual and objective, the chances of being understood in the right perspective are very high. If we ignore this approach, if we ignore this part or this aspect of communication, then chances of misinterpretation, chances of miscommunication and misunderstanding are higher. So, rationality should be there at every stage, at every part of the process of communication. Means when we think what to say, then that thing should be governed by objectivity. We should find some logical connection, then only the other person will be able to understand it. So, all steps in the process of communication need to make sense with respect to one another. Every part of the message, all information, every information should be rational, so that it is understood easily by the other person. Next aspect or next approach to communication is utility. In fact, utility is a term which is very often used in economics. When we talk about some you can say value of something, we talk about the utility of something. So, utility means the usefulness or value that communicators experience at the time of communication. So, in the same light, the utility word is used there, that when two people are indulged in the process of communication, both the people, the sender and the receiver, should experience a satisfaction, and that they should find that communication useful to satisfy one or the other need. Okay. So, utility is the want satisfying power of something. Means want means the need which we need. Okay. We know that communication takes place to satisfy some need or urge of the person. Okay. We feel an urge to share something with the other person. Okay. So, that need should be satisfied by the communication. Some or the other type of satisfaction should be felt by the communicator. Okay. So, it is the satisfaction, okay, the satisfaction or actual or expected, whatever the person has expected. It may be an actual and complete sense of satisfaction, or it may be a partial type of satisfaction. There is a difference between the actually expected and actually received. That is possible, but there should be some kind of utility, usefulness of that information or that act to be there in the communication process, obtained by every attempt at communication. Okay. It means that whenever we communicate with other people, there should be some purpose behind it. There should be some use of that communication. Unnecessary talking, unnecessary writing, nonsense, useless things does not give any positive result. So, utility is must in communication, and some people have tried to find out the characteristics of utility, and it is very well verified that utility is not a physical thing. It is not something which is related to material or which can be seen or which can be, you can say, touched. Utility is psychological entity. It is a state, it is the psychology, the psychological state of the person which feels satisfied, where the person feels himself satisfied. So, that depends upon the mental likes and dislikes, the attitude of a person. Some person may find something you can say useful, the other person may not find that thing so useful. So, that depends on the person's own mental attitude, the approach with which that sender or the receiver is looking at something, trying to understand something. So, utility is somewhat a psychological fact, a psychological reality. So, that differs. So, that is the reason that utility is individual and relative. Since it is a psychological state, every person is different from the other person. We know that there is individual difference. Okay, sender is different from the receiver. So many things are there to determine the mentality, to determine the psychology of a person. So, since it is a psychological fact, it will differ from person to person, and it also may differ from place to place. Something is meaningful at this place when you are standing in a formal situation, that may not be appropriate in an informal situation. Okay, this type of message is useful for one person, this may not be useful for the other person at some other time. So, time, place and person, these are the things which determine the utility. So, utility is individual, pertaining to the person, and it is relative, that can be more, that can be less, that can vanish, that can be enhanced, changing the time, changing the place and changing the person who are involved in the process of communication. Third thing is, since utility is psychological, utility is individual and relative, it cannot be measured objectively. We cannot say that this communication has 2 utility, 3 utility. We cannot measure utility because it is a feeling. We cannot measure our feelings. Okay? We cannot measure accurately the feelings or the psychological state of a person. So, we cannot measure utility in numerical terms. We cannot use numbers to measure the utility. It is only felt and decided by the communicator, the human beings involved in the process of communication. Since no one is, you can say, no one likes to spoil time, no one likes to spoil energy. So, every attempt at communication should have a definite purpose. Without purpose, our communication is without any utility. Okay? Whether we are communicating with friends or relatives, or we are communicating with colleagues at some formal place, whether it is a professional purpose communication or a general purpose communication, every attempt at communication should have a definite purpose. Okay? We should not speak anything useless for the other person. Okay? So, both sender and receiver must find some fulfillment, some satisfaction of one or the other kind for one or the other need in communication. So, when a people finds the fulfillment of some need, fulfillment of some urge only, then the communication is full of utility. That is the utilization of the time, energy and efforts of human being. Okay? And this need may be either some immediate purpose. Some immediate purpose means that we need to inform that particular message we have to transfer. Okay? Or we have to tell some other person about how to do something, that is called instruct. Okay? That is the necessity, that is the need of the hour, because we have to do some other work, and without doing this we cannot do the further things. So, that is necessary, that is the immediate purpose of communication, when we either pass on the information to some other person or we instruct how to do something, that is a kind of practical instructions to do something, or we need to persuade the other person, means we have to convince the other person, we have to make the person agreed with our proposals or with our suggestions, whatever we want. Okay? So, these are the 3 basic functions or the 3 basic objectives of communication. Either we have to share the information, that is those purposes are immediate purposes. Okay? Okay? That is taken as the immediate purposes or the objectives of communication. Okay? The goal of communication, immediate goals of communication, which we have to achieve. Okay? At the larger or the higher level, this utility is important in maintaining the quality interpersonal relations. Two people are happy to communicate with each other when they find that communication is going to be useful, either at the emotional level or at the thought level or for any professional purpose. One or the other need is satisfied. So, that maintains a high quality interpersonal relationship. That is why with some people we want to talk to for one reason or the other. Some people we avoid because we find that there is no utility of talking such person. Okay. So, that is the utility, and if we keep that in focus while approaching communication, then that is helpful in creating quality interpersonal relations with people, and that is the long term value of communication, that we are in a long term understanding and the state of communication with people, and that gives a meaning to our life. Okay, that gives happiness, that gives satisfaction of being in the company of people. Okay, because that is necessary to minimize the misunderstanding also, and that is necessary to release tensions also. Okay, when we talk to people, we feel that we are relaxed. Some people are there to make us relax, that we find that those people are in a state to understand us. So, that is a kind of utility. Sometime we have to do some work and we need to communicate with person, and that person is welcoming us, and that is he is reciprocating in the desired way, and we find objectivity, we find rationality in that communication, we find the utility in that. So, all the approaches of communication are interrelated. And the last approach to understand is universality. Universality means the state of being universal. Universal means everywhere. Okay, that is prevalent everywhere, that exists everywhere. So, universality means to a quality of being present everywhere, right, something that may be applied throughout the universe. If we look at the dictionary, we will find the different meanings of this word universality, that something which can either which is present everywhere, okay, that is prevalent everywhere, or that is that may be applied throughout the universe, in every place, every time, with every person. Okay. So, this is the entity that can be in many places at the same time. The wider term is that you can communicate with many people at the same time. Okay. And you can everywhere you communicate with people, you need to communicate with people. So, universality also mean related to or some characteristics of all or the whole, means everything has this particular feature. Okay. It also means that something which is applicable everywhere in all cases, affecting, concerning or involving all, or to put it simple, used or understood by all. That is being universal, to be present everywhere, to be effective everywhere, to be applicable everywhere, to be affecting everywhere, and something which is used everywhere, used by all everywhere, and something which is understood by all. That is the meaning of the word being universal. And we find this approach very well interwoven with communication, because we find that communication is a fundamental universal process. As we have understood earlier also, that communication gives the meaning to our survival. We live and we communicate. So, everywhere we have to communicate with people to live meaningfully and happily. So, communication is at the basis of our survival. So, communication is fundamental and a universal process. It continues, it takes place everywhere, okay, because it serves to connect the people through this giving and taking, through this reciprocity. Okay. So, it serves to connect sender and receivers through some message across space, across time. Okay. So, that is the, you can say, the power of communication, that it is universal, and communication connects many kinds of senders and receivers whenever the need arises. If there is some need, we should and we have to talk to people whom we have never talked ever, never ever talked. Okay. So, we talk to strangers, we talk to people whom we find that it will be meaningful for us Okay. So, communication connects all types of senders and receiver whenever the situation or need arise. Whether we know the language of the other person or not, then we use the non-verbal signs and symbols to make the other person understand. If we are living in India and we go elsewhere abroad, and somehow we are not able to communicate with them in their language, then we try and devise some other means, some non-verbal means, some gestures to make them understand what we mean. So, that is the universality of communication. Okay. And the universal element of communication which exist within communication are, means which are constant in every process of communication, are the communication environment. Since for every communication we need a particular environment, and that environment determines the nature of communication. As I have given an example, that if we are in some alien atmosphere, the atmosphere or the language which we do not know, there we use our gestures, okay, some sound symbols, some other non-verbal means to communicate with people. So, the environment determines the type of communication, whether verbal or non-verbal, whether oral or written. So, that communication environment is an aspect of communication. Next is use of symbol. We use symbols. Some the sound symbols are used in oral communication, and written symbols are used in written communication. So many symbols which do not have words, like traffic signals, etc. Okay. And the third universal element of communication is the presence of mental filters. Means every individual, the sender and the receiver involved in the process of communication, they have their own mental attitude, their own psychology, and every message, the same message is understood, perceived, interpreted and expressed in different way by a different person. That is a mental filter, and sometimes it creates some hindrance also, and then it is called barrier. So, these are the elements which are present in every process of communication. The sender may vary, the receiver may vary, the message may vary, the channel may vary, but these are the three universal elements which are present in every process of communication. So, towards the end of this lecture, this is a very quick summing up, that what is approach? Approach is a determinant factor of the act of communication, which determines the manner or the way we communicate, okay, how we encode and decode, how we select channel, everything. The first thing is reciprocity. Reciprocity means the two-way sharing of information and intentions both. That reciprocity determines the completion of the process of communication. The response is the way to connect with the sender, and that is being reciprocal, okay, that should be quick and sincere. Second thing is objectivity. Objectivity means pertaining to the actual thing, pertaining to the object, okay. There is no distortion, there is no manipulation, no fabrication, okay, no you can say malintentions, okay. The things are being real, okay. Then it is possible to create a common understanding. If we change every time, then it is, or we distort the thing, we distort the concept, then it is not possible for the other person to have a common understanding, okay. Third is rationality. Rationality means being logical, being reasonable. So, all the parts of our message, every stage in our process should have a rational connection. There should be a logical connection in our expressions, and there should be valid reasons behind every expression. Next is utility. Utility is must, because every attempt at communication should be useful. The usefulness of information as well as the usefulness of the person, because we want to be connected with the other person to get the cooperation and maintain understanding. And the very important and broad aspect is universality, that communication is everywhere, it is omnipresent, and it is applicable throughout the universe. We communicate with living things, we communicate with even non-living things, we find them as important and we communicate with them. That is a you can say extra personal type of communication. Okay. We communicate within ourselves, that is intrapersonal type of communication. So, every time we indulge in communication, and it is applicable everywhere throughout the universe, at all time, all places, with all persons, in every situation. So, these are the 5 approaches to communication which we must understand and we must maintain while indulging in the process of communication for one purpose or the other. That is all in this lecture. Okay, thank you all. Jai Hind.